I want to take some time to talk about why the political system in the United States feels so dysfunctional right now, and why so many people, even outside the country, look at it with increasing anxiety. And then I want to walk through how we can actually fix it, not in a grand theoretical way, but in a straightforward practical sense that could genuinely change outcomes. So imagine you and I are sitting down for 10 minutes to unpack something that has been spiraling for years. That is what we are doing here. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today we're diving into how the core design of the US political system creates warped incentives that push leaders toward extremism and gridlock, and why changing the primary structure could realign the entire system toward genuine problem solving. In short, it's about fixing the rules so the politics finally start working again. I am speaking today from Canada, and a friend here once described living north of the border as being the tenants in an apartment above a meth lab. You are going about your day, trying to keep things stable, but you know there is chaos downstairs, and eventually the whole neighborhood feels the vibrations. That anxiety has only grown as the political climate in the United States keeps heating and cracking in unpredictable ways. What I am going to suggest is that much of what is breaking in American politics is the result of distorted incentives built into the architecture of the system itself. When the rules encourage the wrong behavior, the outcomes will always suffer, and the remarkable part is that these flaws could be fixed for a tiny fraction of what the two dominant parties will spend in a single national election cycle. They will pour billions into ads, rallies, consultants, outrage campaigns, and constant tribal warfare. But the structural repairs that would actually make the system function again cost a relative handful of millions. It is one of the highest leverage opportunities on the planet if you care about improving governance. To understand these incentives, you have to look at the basic numbers that define the political landscape. Think about the approval rating of the United States Congress. It hovers around the teens, sometimes dipping lower, rarely climbing above the 20s. Most Americans think Congress is broken. Now, take the re-election rate for members of the House of Representatives. That number is in the mid-90s. It is almost impossible to lose your seat if you already have it. Those two numbers should not coexist. How can an institution that people broadly dislike have incumbents who nearly always keep their jobs? The answer lies in how districts are drawn. The overwhelming majority of congressional districts in the United States are engineered to lean heavily toward one party. That means the real contest is not in November, it is in the primaries. But only a small share of eligible voters participate in primaries. And the people who do show up tend to be the most ideological, the most hardened, the most passionate about their party identity. These voters often demand purity rather than compromise. So the fiction Americans grow up believing is that politicians need to satisfy most voters to stay in office. The reality is that many politicians only need to avoid angering a narrow slice of their party's most intense supporters. If they keep that thin group happy, they are safe. If they upset them, even slightly, their careers can collapse. Look at what happened to the Republican members of the House who voted to impeach the former president after the January attack on the Capitol. Out of all those who ran again, only a small number survived their primaries. They did not lose broad public support. They lost the favor of a tiny but powerful segment of their party's base. That is how warped these incentives have become. If you cross the ideological guardrails of your base, you face consequences that no general election voter can counterbalance. And once you see this dynamic, a lot of modern American politics begins to make sense. You have primaries dragging candidates to the edges. You have media networks reinforcing tribal identities and framing politics as a team sport. You have social media amplifying outrage, rewarding the most dramatic voices and punishing nuance. These forces reinforce each other, pushing people further into echo chambers. It has reached a point where a sitting senator openly admitted that in today's climate, a problem is more useful unsolved than solved. If lawmakers reach across the aisle and hammer out a compromise, they risk being labeled disloyal or impure. Their base may turn on them, their political future becomes uncertain. But if they leave the issue unresolved, they face no penalty. In fact, they can fundraise off the anger. They can go on television and scold the opposition. They can rile up supporters and proclaim that the other side is the reason nothing gets done. The incentives reward theatrical failure over practical progress. You can plug any number of major issues into this dynamic: immigration, climate, poverty, artificial intelligence, budget reform. There is an entire shelf of urgent problems that keeps accumulating dust because there is more political reward in grandstanding than in governing. It is no wonder people feel discouraged. vote. But here is the surprising twist. There actually is a way out of this, and it is not theoretical. There is a real functioning model already being tested. Credit for highlighting it goes to thinkers who study competition and political design. They point out that if you want to change behavior, you do not plead for goodwill, you change the rules of the game. In 2020, the state of Alaska adopted a new primary structure. Instead of separate party primaries, every candidate runs in a single open primary. The top 4 advance. Then, in the general election, voters use ranked choice voting to select whom they prefer. This system allows voters to list candidates in order of preference rather than having to choose only one. To understand the impact, consider how the old system works. Under the traditional model, each party selects one candidate and those nominees compete. In districts dominated by one party, the general election is practically predetermined. The primary is the only election that matters, and it is controlled by a narrow band of voters. As a result, politicians cater to extremes rather than the broader public. But in Alaska's revised system, candidates must appeal to more than their party's die-hard base. They have to be respectable enough to serve as someone's second choice or third choice. This changes the entire strategy. It encourages consensus behavior. It rewards broad appeal rather than ideological rigidity. A vivid example came when an internationally recognizable figure ran for a congressional seat. Under the old system, she likely would have coasted to victory because the state leans conservative. But under the new structure, another lesser-known candidate emerged victorious because enough voters ranked her second. That would not have been possible under the old binary primaries. The new system expanded the field and softened the incentive to polarize. In the same election, another long-serving senator who had angered members of her party faced re-election. Her approval numbers among partisan loyalists had plunged. Under the old system, she might have been ousted easily in a primary, but under the ranked choice structure, she made it to the general election and ultimately won because she was broadly acceptable to many voters, even if she was not the first choice of the most partisan faction. The system changed the incentive. Instead of needing to appease the most extreme voices, she needed to build a coalition of reasonable support across the electorate. The effect of these reforms was substantial and quick, and here is the staggering part. The campaign to adopt this change cost around $6 million. Compare that to the $10 billion the major parties planned to burn through this cycle. A tiny investment changed the entire dynamic of a state's elections, and it can be replicated. There are dozens of states where citizens can use ballot initiatives to adopt similar reforms. One more state recently did so. Even though both major parties opposed the change, voters supported it because they understood something simple. Most people want a system that represents them, not a system that fences them out. One ad featured a veteran explaining that after serving his country, he returned home only to find that as an independent voter, he could not participate in primaries. That resonated. A majority agreed the rules should change. More states are considering these reforms. Imagine several United States senators freed from the extreme pressure of party primaries. Imagine members of Congress who no longer fear the most radical few. That would not solve everything, but it would reshape political incentives dramatically. It would reward problem solving and punish obstruction. If reforms of this kind passed in 10 states, the total cost would be roughly $200 million. That is 2% of what will be spent in flaming division this year. 2% for a chance to realign incentives so the government can actually function. This year will be loud. You will hear constant noise urging you to join one side or the other, to see politics as a fight where you must pick a team. But I hope you consider a different option. Rather than joining a partisan squad, join the effort to change the incentives that are breaking the system. If enough people do that, something powerful can happen. The country might begin to feel whole again. The political conversation might cool down. We might finally have the chance to tackle the real problems of our era instead of fighting endlessly about who is to blame for what. And if we can get there, if we can shift the structure that shapes political behavior, then maybe we can build a future that feels less like an apartment above a meth lab and more like a place worth sharing with the generations that follow.